Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. Today, we are going to continue with part 2 of Mastering Mistake Making with nonprofit mistake-making guru John Pearson. How is that for a title?
That's perfect.
Does that go on your business card now?
I'm printing new ones tomorrow.
For those who missed last week, besides being a good friend, John Pearson is a board governance and management consultant from San Clemente, California, who has served more than 30 years as a nonprofit ministry CEO of 3 very significant organizations. John and I worked one of them in a Christian Management Association. We worked together to that kind of like mid-90s to 2005-ish or something like that. And we did workshops, seminars, all sorts of things. It was a great time of my life. Working with you, it was such a fun time. You know, we had a blast at the seminars, and they were so beneficial. You know, there's so many people attended. You really did an excellent job with that. And I have to ask you, I didn't mean to ask you on the air, but I'm going to ask you, you were CEO of the Willow Creek Association. Were you part of the birth of GLN?
No, during a snowstorm in Chicago, a headhunter from Southern California called and asked would I consider coming out to Southern California. And I called my wife from the office, and when I got home, she was packed. I loved Willow Creek Association, but we do love Southern California.
Yeah, and Bill Hybels, I love Bill Hybels. He was such a great guy. I mean, he was pretty influential in my life at a certain period that I feel like I owe him a lot. And that was the pastor that sort of started Willow Creek Association back, like 3 decades ago or long time ago.
Long time ago.
Now, John is also author of 10 books on board governance and leadership development with an emphasis on the highest levels of organizations. And I want to get right into the show, so let's bring John. John, welcome back to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you. Great to be with you last week, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me to come back a second time, so thank you.
Well, we just had so much to cover that they're just. I realized as I wrote my notes, I just said, "This is either an hour and a half to 2 hour show, or we break it into 2." And I decided to break it into 2. And I think we had just a nice overview of what mistake making is all about. You know, and my bias that a lot of mistake making comes from ignorance. It just comes from lack of knowledge, lack of. You know, like we're going to talk about listening. How many of us have been educated on listening? Now, I've been into listening for 2 or 3 decades, but I was educated in it. You know, I mean, I used to teach Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Right. And
that was listening with intent to understand, not intent to get your way or something like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't exactly that. but it is. We don't realize we're bad listeners.
Oh my.
We don't know until we get educated in it. And you're very a strong proponent of reading, seminars, listening, whatever it is, information gathering outside of your comfort zone.
Right. It's so easy to be lazy. And we have so much information we have to master in our little niche jobs. And so to ask me to read something kind of out there or to learn in a discipline that I know nothing about is a challenge. But now I gravitate that way, and I'm learning a lot. I read a book, one of the books I reviewed in my little newsletter was The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership by Stephen Sample, who was president of USC.
Yeah.
And he said he doesn't read a book until he's heard 2 or 3 people. He's passed away now, I believe, but he always wanted to be sure 2 or 3 people had read it. He stopped reading the newspaper first. Some of your listeners may not know what a newspaper is, but he stopped reading it for 6 months. He got along pretty well without it. And so he just kind of took a contrarian step back. Okay, what what should I be reading and learning from? And it's a great book, The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership.
It's funny you would say that about Steve. I took years ago, I read where he no longer read newspapers. He said, if anything important is going to happen, someone's going to tell me.
Yes.
And
exactly.
I stopped reading newspapers, and I'm not a big news fan.
Yeah.
Although today I will learn about contrarian thinking. I watch Fox News, I watch CNN. I read the Atlantic commie rag, and I read the National Review fascist rag. So I get two totally different perspectives, and I've kind of quit reading them now. But I just wanted an introduction into my thinking is biased, and unless I hear arguments and other positions, I'm not educated. So
and that's a huge mistake. I regret all the years that my reading was so narrow.
But that's what we're taught, and I don't want to downplay Christianity, but when we get into like seminaries and when we get into higher level education, it's not about broad thinking. It's all about evangelism in a certain from a certain perspective, and it doesn't offer counter perspectives, or if it does, it's all about shooting them down. It's not about what's the purity, what's the truth in there, and some of the people that I was taught not to read are my favorite theologians today.
There you go.
Because they just have such incredible insight. You know what I want to talk about? What I want to start is one of my favorite Christian teachers, priests out there is Richard Rohr from the Center of Action and Contemplation. And he's a Franciscan priest, and I'm very Franciscan. And as my listeners know, in my mystic pursuits, I'm Catholic light. I'm still into saint this and saint that, and I give myself communion every day that breaks the Catholic rules, but doesn't break the Episcopal rules. And so Episcopalian is like whatever you want to be. In a description of Richard Rohr's excellent book, Falling Forward, that's that may be on your list.
It's not, but it is now.
It is. It's brilliant. And he talks about the first and second half of life. And the first half of life is gathering identity and achievements, creating something that is truly healthy ego-wise. So you have a foundation. But the second half of life is very different. And he writes this: as we grow older, and that's the second half of life, as we grow older, we begin to embark on a journey of the second half of life. Catch this. One that involves accepting failure, accepting loss of control, and accepting necessary suffering. Those are not ideals of the first half of life. When you're trying to make a name for yourself, you're trying to grow up, or trying to grow into position. Failures and loss of control and necessary suffering. But as you get older, you realize those are the teaching points, aren't they?
Yes.
It is the failure. It is the loss of control. It is necessary suffering that are our learning points, the same way that you teach mistakes. Mistakes are learning points. So what are your thoughts on failure, loss of control, and necessary suffering as part of the mistake-making process?
From early on, Johnny, don't make any mistakes. I remember our grandson, Anders, somehow, I think he was 3 maybe, he got a hold of some candy and took it up to his room, sat on his bed, and my daughter-in-law Melinda came in and said, "Anders, did you eat all that candy?" And he goes, "I ate it by accident." So you don't.
In other words, it was a dopamine fix.
Yeah. He's now 20. He's wonderful, wonderful young man. You're kind of schooled and coached. Don't make mistakes, and certainly don't admit your mistakes. Whereas last week you were talking about the entrepreneurs, and a lot of entrepreneurial companies and books talk about we want to make our mistakes fast. The contrarian view of that was President Eisenhower, and I know I'm dealing with a very small niche of your audience who can remember President Eisenhower. But President Eisenhower, Ike, I like Ike, said, let's not be in a hurry to make our mistakes. It was kind of interesting. You know, he was Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, World War II. And if you read his whole spiel on that, you say, okay, that's wise. So you have to, what this book did for me was it just helped me get immersed into the mistake-making literature. And as I mentioned last week, I started making little marks on my book, writing little M's on them whenever I saw a mistake. And since writing the book on mastering mistake making, I'm amazed at how much of the literature I missed and contrarian views about mistake making. But the side I've landed on is, oh my, I made a lot of mistakes. I should not have made that many mistakes if I'd just been a better learner, been more of a lifelong learner earlier in my life.
But you're not taught that, John. I mean,
no.
Where do you get that? That you know, we're in such a settled culture that we want to say, this is my position and this is where I'm at. Yeah. And you know, my common phrase is never believe what I have to say today because I could change my mind tomorrow, based on other data. Yeah. I mean, it's not just that I'm flaking.
Sure.
If I get better data, then I say, you know, I'm not going to stick with something that's unreasonable.
Yeah.
Before I do that, what do you think of this thought that mistakes are learning opportunities in disguise?
Totally. Beautifully said. That really should be the tagline in the book. That describes it. Learning opportunities. What can I learn? And are we going to do an after action sit down, rather not a blaming party, but okay, what did we learn?
Sort of a post-mortem.
Post-mortem.
I used to do those when I was a consultant. We would do projects in corporations, and we would always do a post-mortem. Yeah. You know, what worked, what didn't work. And I'm a big fan of pilot projects. Yep. And just ripping apart. Yep. You know, I used to call, like, strategic planning, I would call it piñata planning. It's where you don't start strategic planning from a blank slate. Yeah. You give a template. Yeah. And that's a piñata. And then you give everybody a stick to beat the crap out of it.
Whack at it.
And then whatever's left is the kernel of your strategic plan, and then you build from there.
And did you actually bring a piñata then to celebrate the...
No.
Oh.
No.
That would have been good.
I didn't. I don't know what I would put in it that would be interesting. So you know what I want to do is I have two mistakes that I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
And I'd like to talk about the learnings from those mistakes. And I've selected two. One of the mistakes is huge in the American population today. Now, while the other is common, it might be the most challenging, one of the most challenging mistake, how we compensate or how we deal with that mistake. Yeah. So let's go to the first one, and it is still early in the book, mistake number 4, and that is failing to learn the art of listening. We, in Charlie language, we suck at listening. We just, you know, and that is a society. That's, you know, and we are much more comfortable with talking than listening, and typically when we're listening, we're awfully just listening for that pause. So we can come in and give our opinion.
When you're talking, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next once you give me a chance.
Yeah, and I'm giving you a chance.
I was at this international conference in New Zealand, and I was emceeing a Q&A with the speaker, and people were sending up their 3x5 cards, and I'm sorting them to give them a good question. He's sitting next to me. Oh my, tons of them. And all of a sudden, the guy's name was Lee. He says to me, "So John, did I answer that question?" I wasn't listening at all to what he was saying in front of 1,000 people.
That's a great story. You abbreviated that story, but that is a great story.
And so he says, "Did I answer the question?" And I didn't know what else to say. I said, "Was I supposed to be listening?" Well, of course, everybody in the audience roared because we've all been there.
Oh, yes. You have, as all of us, a ton of experiences of making the mistake of failure to listen. What did you do to make that experience of not listening a learning experience? What were the habits that you, or the actions you took?
It's interesting you say habits, because I was blessed to be at a workshop. I was chairman of the board of a credit union, and the CEO called me one day. He said, "John, I got a problem." And I thought, oh no. He says, I'd like to go to a conference, but I can't go without bringing my board chair. And I'm thinking, okay, it's in Bakersfield, California. No, nothing wrong with Bakersfield, but and he says, it's in Hawaii, and you can bring your wife. And I said, we're available. And he said, I haven't given you the dates yet. I said, it doesn't matter. Well, at this conference, one of the half-day workshops was the author of a book called The Coaching Habit. What did I learn? He had this session where he said, okay, pair up with another person at your round table. There were, 100 plus CEOs and board chairs. And so I sitting next to a board chair of another credit union. And he says, now I'm going to put up on the PowerPoint 4 questions. And he gave us a little briefing on this. And he says, one of you can ask the questions and the other one answers them. But the one asking the question, you cannot say anything other than the question. You must listen to the guy. Well, I thought the easier thing was to ask the questions. So the first question on the PowerPoint was, what's the real challenge here for you? So you got to describe a problem. So this guy described a problem he was having with his board. And we only had about 4 minutes for this drill. So after about a minute, he knew it. I had to ask the next question. The next question was, and what else? And this author of The Coaching Habit calls it the AWE question, A-W-E, and what else? So I had to ask, and what else? Well, then he started going a little deeper of how this problem with his board was affecting him personally. I mean, it was really good. And I, who've got all the answers, just kept trying to reach in and tell him what he should do. But the rules were, all I could do is ask the question. Well, then another minute goes by. The third question was, and what else? So
Mike Wallace teaches that, by the way.
We both laugh, and I say, and what else? And he says, oh my, I realize that just in this conversation, I've been da-da-da-da-da-da. And so then the last question is, so what's the real challenge here for you? He says, wow, John, this has been so helpful for me. Thank you so much. I just asked the question.
And you didn't do anything.
I didn't do anything.
And then said, so tell me more. What else?
Yeah. For a guy like me, that's a very challenging discipline, but at least I know when I'm not doing it. It's one of those lifelong learning lessons to be constantly, it's part of the listening process. And I just realized I had never read, Charlie, one book on listening. I'd never read an article on listening. I hadn't read a podcast. I mean, that just wasn't anywhere on anything that interested me or that I thought I should learn until all of a sudden I kind of looked in the mirror and saw I'm a terrible listener. What I challenge people to do is like to take this mistake and say, so is there a book? I recommend a book for each of the mistakes.
Yeah, that's great.
Is there a book you need to read? He's written 2 books, The Coaching Habit, Say Less, Ask More, and Change the Way You Lead Forever. And then his book was The Advice Trap, Be Humble, Stay Curious, and Change the Way You Lead Forever. When I wrote a review of that book, I did a little, hello, my name is, and I put, hello, my name is Advice Monster.
Advice Monster, I saw that. As we talk about this, if we get a bit deeper into the profundity of listening, I learned from a therapist a long time ago that there are 3, this is in his view, 3 fundamental human needs. I mean, every psychologist and psychiatrist and philosopher is going to say 3 different human needs. But his happened to be, and they've resonated with me, every person needs to be heard, needs to be cared for or cared about, not not in a what do you call it? Codependent way.
Way.
Not cared for in a codependent way, but cared about and they need to be accepted by something significant. If we have those three things, and the herd is ignored, and I long to be heard, and yet no one wants to hear me.
Yeah.
My wife and I have gotten really good at it, at not talking till the other person is finished. I'm
supposed to do that too? Oh, man.
Oh, and then my coach is, she is a brilliant listener. She will not talk until I am done. If we have an hour session and I talk for 30 minutes, she'll just sit quiet.
Wow.
She will just say, when you're done, then I'll interject. And our need to be heard, I think this is a very critical mistake that we don't know about. We think we're being sympathetic. We think our comments are being sympathetic. We think we're doing a good job. We're telling them, oh, well, what if you try this? What if it... They don't want to know what if you try. They just want to know, do you give a rip?
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. I think it's very powerful. I'm moving a bit tactical to philosophical.
Okay.
In your book, you offer an insight lifted from the Harvard Business Review, and it was titled, "The 4 Reasons Mistakes Are Necessary," which I didn't like the title, so I changed it to 4 Reasons Mistakes Are Inevitable, because after I wrote what they put down there, the 4 reasons, they're inevitable. If you have these reasons...
You're good at that, Charlie.
But I mean, don't you think they are inevitable? I mean,
absolutely.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
This is a whole podcast in these 4 reasons, but I want to briefly go over them. Because I talked to my wife about them. She didn't get them on the first reading, but after I explained to them, she goes, oh, that's perfect. So I think we need to explain it a little bit. But 4 reasons from the Harvard Business Review that mistakes are inevitable. The first one is we are overconfident. We just think our bag of tricks is going to solve everything. And our grand person, for successful leaders, our grand personality, our ability to be persuasive and to cast a vision, and the multitudes will follow.
Charlie, you just bring up a very painful memory, and I may need the phone number of your therapist. I'm at the Center for Creative Leadership for a program that our organization was running, but the guy running it, Greg Leith, asked...
And this was CMA, right?
CMA. Mm-hmm. He said, John, you should be a guinea pig. You should go through the program yourself as the CEO. So I did. Well, it's a fabulous organization, Center for Creative Leadership. So all of my direct reports filled out all kinds of assessments on me and sent those to the center. And there were about 30 of us going through the program. And then after a week of all kinds of exercises, I meet with a consulting psychologist. And she's got all the assessments laid out, and I've looked at them before, but now she's going to kind of put a bow on the package. And she asked me this question, like, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I said, well, I've always thought I could kind of reach in and pull out something out of my bag of tricks. And she points to all these assessments and says, how's that working out for you, John? Oh, my. And so... overconfident, and so that whole thing on feedback, none of us should be overconfident, because when we look in the mirror, we know we don't even measure up to our own standards. But we make all these mistakes because we just don't slow down to get feedback, to listen, to learn from others, to ask the team, what do you all think? Yeah, I mean, that's a great summary of a lot of the mistakes in this book.
I have listed what I thought would be the opposite of each. So what would be the healthy pursuit? And I put, instead of being overconfident, we need to be humble. We need to recognize at all times I can be wrong.
Yeah.
At all times, no matter
time.
what it is, I can be wrong.
I have a friend who's no longer with us, but he would say to his wife, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Do you want to talk about it? It was kind of a throwaway joke line, but at his heart, he really...
He wanted that.
He put that out there, yeah.
Well, let's move to the next one. And this is, I'll need your explanation on this because I have my explanation, but I'm curious of yours. And we're talking about the reasons that mistakes are inevitable. And I think everybody gets overconfidence. They get that I think too highly of my own thoughts. And maybe it's not a character flaw. It's just natural that I have lived with my own thoughts and my own beliefs for the longest time, and they've worked for me.
Yeah.
But as you move up to leadership and just the human interpersonal, overconfident turned into be cocky, arrogant, one-way, and that doesn't work. So the next one is risk averse.
Yeah.
That was once kind of a goal of businesses, wasn't it? Not to take too many risks, and now we're in the exact opposite.
It is amazing how it's turned. I've kind of hung on Peter Drucker's words, who says people who don't take risks generally make about 2 big mistakes a year, and people who do take risks generally make about 2 big mistakes a year. And that was his way of saying, don't be risk averse. Just you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna make mistakes. There's that old story of the CEO, maybe the founder of IBM, whose sales guy who submitted his resignation because he had just blown $1 million contract with the federal government. I've forgotten his name now, but the CEO says, well, I'm not gonna take your resignation. You've just made $1 million mistake. We want to learn from that. We're going to learn an awful lot, and you're going to stay here and learn that. Now, that's a culture thing. So the risk-averse cultures do damage to their people and to their company's growth, to their organization's value system. But it starts at the top. How do we treat mistakes? Remember the old book by Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence? He talked about a company that literally at their headquarters outside they had a cannon, and they would shoot off a cannon when somebody made a big mistake.
Oh, really?
To celebrate. And so the leadership team, the C-suite, the managers of your department, how they deal with mistakes and can celebrate what we learned.
If they, that also requires broad thinking to say, we did learn something from that mistake.
Exactly.
What did we learn?
Yeah.
Too many times the mistakes are just saying it's a mistake, we need to throw it out. There's no effort into discovering what we can learn. And if mistakes are truly opportunities for development opportunities in disguise, we're missing out.
Yeah.
I won't go through all 4, but I want to go through the number 3rd one because I think it's important, and that we have this tendency to seek confirming evidence that, and I'll put it political, the far right listens to Fox News that just supports their ideals. And the far left will listen to CNN or something like that. I don't know for sure. CNN likes to call itself middle of the road, but I've been watching it, and it's really not quite middle of the road. But we seek this confirming evidence, and so we become entrenched in our ideas, and opposite ideas are not only offensive, but they're destructive, they're dangerous, but we don't know where they come from. That's why I like to read The Atlantic, that would give me perspective.
Yeah.
I think we need to seek perspective.
Yeah. I love reading biographies of U.S. presidents, and I also read a fascinating one on the chiefs of staff, who, by the way, never stay very long. It's a book called The Gatekeepers. And
they don't, do they?
No, they don't. And everybody's the media is so shocked that, like, another one, revolving door. Well, nobody stays that long. They can't. It's too hard of a job. In a biography of President Eisenhower, written by his granddaughter, published in 2020, I think it was, she talked about he would intentionally ask people to prepare the pro and con arguments. So you'd have a team present the pro and then he'd have a team present the con article, and they'd all be in there hearing this, and then he would make a decision. But he wanted just like a college debate, he wanted the best minds thinking on both sides of an issue. Do we
have anything like that now?
There's nothing like that now.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It's so sad.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, the counter to that is to seek to learn the other side of your beliefs or your arguments.
Yeah.
I have one final mistake that I want to talk about that I think is the most difficult, maybe one of the most difficult to handle, and that's mistake number 10 in your book. And that's being Mr. Nice Guy versus Mr. Truthful Guy. Now, the reason I say this is one of the most difficult mistakes to correct is because it interferes with our sort of fundamental human need for safety and security. We all want to be liked. I mean, that is, with rare exception, we want to be liked. When we do that, we're not always doing the best maneuver. Uncertainty, I think we need to tell the truth, but part of the truth, there's twofold. I think many times, not all the time, but many times, the Lord has been gracious and has gifted me to give bad news in a way that people can talk about it, because I can lift them up and say they're human. This is it. We need to work on this. This is not this I have against you sort of thing.
Yeah.
Here's an issue that's getting in the way, that looks like it's getting in the way of your success. How can we manage that? How can we talk about that? One of the things that we have an uncertainty about is if we have a truth, is my truthful exhortation, what I perceive as truth, is it really true? Yeah. So how do you deal with that, and what do you learn from that? And then we're going to close.
Well, in the mistake I talk about of just all of a sudden recognizing being Mr. Nice Guy versus Mr. Truthful Guy, the context was I had all my years of being a CEO, 25 of them were with nonprofit national or international associations. Mr. Nice Guy. Every dues-paying member for 25 years would call or write or even before email, and I had to serve them because I wanted them to renew their membership. Okay, so you're going to Mr. Nice Guy. Then I became a consultant, and then I'm meeting with boards, and they're paying me, yes, but in the early couple of years, they're just so dysfunctional. Somebody needs to tell them. Wonder who could tell them. Well, then I realized that's what they're paying me to do, and if they don't hire me back for another thing, it's okay, because it's far my integrity is on the line. So then,
well, it fits your business model.
Yeah,
I mean, this is your business model of truth telling.
And so, but I find that last week we talked about the 4 social styles: driver, analytical, amiable, expressive. The relational ones are the amiables and expressives, and they tend not to tell the truth as much as the analyticals and drivers. So
and they probably don't take the truth very well either.
Right. And so I use surveys, one-on-one. Many times I'll talk to every board member in a 20-minute phone call before my first full day with a board at a retreat or whatever. I want to get the sense of, okay, what are the issues? And I'll do an online survey. My wife is very discerning, and she will look over the surveys, and I'll be at a hotel room in Cleveland, and I'll call her and say, what do you think about the group I'm going to be with tomorrow? She says, well, there are about 3 of them that have got a huge issue. You need to be watching for that. So she's so helpful. I learned that I had to be tougher. So one of the books I mentioned is the one by General Stanley McChrystal on Leaders, Myth, and Reality. It's a fabulous book. He pairs this person against this person. So he paired Margaret Thatcher against Boss Tweed, the machine in New York. I've always liked Margaret Thatcher. She's passed away now. But she said, if you set out to be liked, you would be prepared to compromise on anything at any time, and you would achieve nothing.
Yeah, I love that quote. I read
Yeah,
that quote.
yeah.
I think that's...
For me, before God, I just have to say, okay, Lord, help me to be a person of integrity in answering the questions truthfully, in giving them the data, listening, asking them the questions that are going to help them reveal the answers that will help them move to a better level of leadership and governance. So
yeah, and as I perceive it, because when you're going in as an expert. You're not going in to rubber stamp everything they're doing.
Yeah.
You're going in because there's a problem, and if you don't identify the problem, then you really failed at your job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you have to be Mr. Truthful guy.
Yeah.
These mistakes, the thing I like about the mistakes, John, that you've listed, they're just such normal human mistakes.
You're right. You're right.
This is not uncommon, So I don't think any of us look through that and say, I've done that. Sometime in my life, I've done that. But after I learn that it's a mistake, do I seek lifelong learning? Do I think how to do this better? How to be more impactful, more effective, more filled with grace and wisdom? That are just those are huge aspects of my life, is grace and wisdom. And in our Christian perspective, the Lord, as we seek the Lord, we'll get insight and perspective. But those of you that are not of a Christian perspective, you can still ponder, and there will come something from outside, from some source that's going to give you clarity. That we are spiritual beings, and there's more information out there, and you can depend on that too. John Pearson, I know you're retired, so you don't want business.
Thank you.
But I don't know how you retire. You're an invaluable resource in nonprofits, and don't be surprised if Wells of Life starts calling you more.
Well, in the back of this book, Mastering Mistake Making, I've thrown in a bonus chapter, number 26, and I called it Do It Yourself Mistake Maker, so that at staff meetings you can just say, okay, I didn't really get excited about Pearson's mistakes, but here's a really good mistake I made. So I would encourage people to take a look at that one.
Thank you. Well, John Pearson, you're the best. I'm so glad we were able to connect again. It's just
Yes.
the friendship and love is just so evident. Thank you so much for being on the show with me. And I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.